Good360's mission is to help people and the planet by reducing need and waste in our communities at the same time. Good360 does this by connecting people in need, charities and disadvantaged schools with businesses willing to donate unsold or surplus goods and services, so everyone benefits. Charities and disadvantaged schools simply register for free membership on our website and order the brand new goods that they need for their community, ensuring the right goods get to the right people at the right time. This in turn creates a circle of good that enables businesses, communities and government, schools and charities, people in crisis, society, our planet, and all of us to benefit in more ways than one. So join the Good360 Circle of Good and help us reduce need and waste in our communities at the same time. It's good for everyone.
Alison, Covington, thank you for joining us. Good morning. Thank you for being here at the Impact Leaders webinar.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. It's been a one for me personally, you know, watching your journey and that of Good360 over many years, and really astounded at the impact you're having for Australian communities. Can we perhaps start by just touching on what does Good360 do?
So as for this video, you know, our role is to make sure that businesses have the ability to make sure that their goods don't go to waste. So what we do is work with businesses of all sizes to make sure that if they have brand new goods, they get into the hands of Australians who really do need them. And I think what most people didn't realise is that businesses don't often or sometimes don't sell all their goods. And sometimes they just need a mechanism to be able to seamlessly donate those to charities. And we work with around 4,000 charities and disadvantaged schools here in Australia. So we try to make it really easy for them to make sure that these goods get a life and that they don't go to landfill. And I think that's the bit that most people don't realise, is that sometimes goods just don't get sold. And we just want to play that role as to make sure we get them into the hands of Australians who need them most.
Can you give us sort of top level the numbers we're talking about here, the number of products that would otherwise make it and still do perhaps make it to landfill?
Yeah, it's actually quite astounding. We commissioned a report with Deloitte's Access Economics back in 2022, and the goods that are going to waste here in Australia is around $2.5 billion worth of goods. And so that's B for billion, not million. Goods go to waste each year. And Good360, we're managing to match up around $100 million worth of those goods. And so that's less than 5% of the available goods are getting matched, but there's still a lot of goods that are not being matched. And so businesses don't know to be able to work with charities like Good360. So a lot of businesses are more familiar with food waste and they're working with charities to do that, but they don't know that there's charities like ourselves who can help them, whether that's with clothing, toys, personal care, white goods, furniture, all those fabulous goods that need to find a home and make sure they're being used. Whereas a lot of people in governments, consumers are really passionate about recycling goods. What we're passionate about is making sure that these goods have a life. Make sure that if somebody's taking our planet's really valuable resources and turn them into something, is that they actually get used before we put them back into landfill.
I think you'd agree that ideally what we both do, we should be put out of business, right? Would be the ultimate success story. From a systems level, what would be required? I mean, it's a failure. It's a systems failure, right? Where so much is being produced that isn't being sold or used. Given your unique insights and knowledge of the industry and the sort of models of production, what would you suggest is ultimately required so that all these excess goods are not being made in the first place?
I don't think that a lot is actually excess. It's around education. So we as consumers, we're quite a fickle bunch, and things to happen in the world that make it harder for businesses to sell through these goods. So if you look at this year in particular, so we've got a cost of living crisis that businesses, when they've produced these goods, and we can't blame the business. So if we have a look at a business cycle when they produce goods, it's probably 12, 18 months it takes in terms of manufacturing, deciding to place these goods, get them into store. Now, these businesses, just like a lot of customers, didn't see 12 interest rate hikes coming when they made the decision to produce these goods. But the Reserve Bank and the powers that be put these interest rate hikes through before the businesses made the decision to manufacture these goods. And so then customers didn't have the money in their pockets to buy these goods. And so those decisions to actually how much they produced was well in advance of these interest rate hikes. And so then customers came along and went, okay, I don't actually have the spending power I once had 12 months ago. And so these goods then didn't get purchased. And so businesses are now having soft trading conditions, but that was well before they made the decisions to produce those goods. So that's not the power of the business. It's actually the customer who didn't buy it. And so there's soft trading conditions. What is there that needs to happen is that the business needs to be able to have the power to say, hey, we're not selling them. We need to donate them and have the ability to donate these goods. Now that costs businesses a lot of money, and the trading terms to be able to do that is actually, quite difficult for business to stay in business and donate those goods when they can't make money out of those goods. But that wasn't their fault that those goods didn't sell. So we always make out that the businesses are evil, but it's also part of just the economy, the business. Customers didn't buy that. So we as customers also have to take some responsibility there. It's a big, cycle here that's happening. And that's not the first time. We've seen it in COVID. COVID, people didn't buy. The stores were locked up. We all weren't purchasing. So we can't say that businesses aren't learning from these mistakes. It's economic factors that happen. It's, warm or cold summers, warm winters, all these things happen that businesses actually can't predict. So we just have to say, let's actually empower businesses to do the right thing, and then let communities benefit from that. Let charities actually put them into society and do good with that. And don't make the businesses be the villains here. Let them be the heroes. Let them be the heroes for helping community. And yes.
No, totally. I mean, am I correct though that most products that you pass on are shelf stable, and therefore just playing devil's advocate, why aren't the businesses able to sell them over a longer life cycle, or is it the cost of holding onto them is no longer possible, and therefore passing them on to you to take care of is what makes most economic sense at that time?
Yeah. So warehouse cost is very expensive for businesses. So storing them is a very expensive thing. Seasonality. So what's happening is the next season stuff's coming in. So they need to move this stock on. So they need to have a home for them. So that's the problem. So everything actually, like, whilst we might think that goods don't have a season, fashions do have seasons. So you think about clothing, but also if we think about homewares, towels change colours between seasons. Our homewares do change colours. We've actually become a very fickle society that our homewares are actually spring and winter and all these types of things. So businesses actually have to move their seasons on as well. You can't imagine it, but a toaster is a different colour between seasons and things like that. So consumers are quite fickle.
Are you serious?
Seasonality. Serious. Your cushions are different colours between seasons, all these types of things. Models of washing machines, etc. They do change seasons and models and things like that.
Do people change the colour of their toaster based on the...
I asked you to go in store and have a look at all the seasonality of toasters. A year or two ago, we were fascinated with the copper colour of colours of sort of homewares. It was all copper. Now, it might be silver or gold or things like that. Things just change. Customers are very fickle about things. We're trained to like different colours.
Well, it's a broader conversation, perhaps not for here, around, who's ultimately responsible for creating the demand for different coloured toasters, right? And you and I just touched on, before we went live here, about what's happening in the world and the tragedy of Israel. And of course, the colour of the toaster becomes a very redundant point as we can be quickly reminded of what matters and the fragility of just sometimes being alive. And so that's a complex one, and the work you're doing is amazing. And as a founder and managing director of Good360, love to hear your story about what inspired you. Was there a moment? Was it a series of moments that inspired you to start Good360?
Yeah, it was actually by accident. So I read about Good360 operating in the US, and they had been operating for more than 30 years, and they had matched up $7 billion worth of goods. And I couldn't see it happening in Australia. And I just thought, sometimes we're behind trend by a few years in international trends, but not a few decades. And then I couldn't unknow that. And it's one of those things that you sort of think, well, why don't we have something like this in our country? And why is all that going still to waste when we're fabulous at food waste? But what about all those other goods that businesses didn't have a solution for? So businesses needed this problem solved. But importantly, we had lots of Australians who weren't benefiting from these billions of dollars worth of goods. And our planet was suffering because of this. So, our landfills here in Australia were suffering, and they couldn't continue to suffer. And so then it was just one of those things that just was driving me crazy, and I had to do something about it. And if it wasn't me, then who was it going to be? And that's the case for so many founders. But importantly, what I thought I was good at was getting other people to join a cause. I couldn't do it by myself, but I was very good at getting other people to join in and use their skills to do something about it. And I thought that's what I could do, was whilst I could see there was a problem that needed solving, I could get lots of other people to use their brilliance to solve the problem. And I think that was probably where I thought I could add the most value, is to get other people to be passionate about this as well.
And how many years ago was that?
That was 2015.
Okay.
So it seems like a little time ago now, but in that small amount of time, which is about 8 years or so, we've now matched $400 million worth of goods, or 40 million items. And if I hadn't have been so outraged about it, imagine that, 40 million items, or, we've supported 4 million Australians now with those goods. And it's just sort of takes somebody to go, well, that doesn't make sense for us here in Australia to miss out on something that other countries are benefiting from.
Absolutely. And so what would you say, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot that makes Good360 unique. Are there any particular points in respect to its focus, methodology, and the impact that you're having that you would say really makes Good360 stand apart as a charitable organisation?
Yeah, I think it's the technology that we use. So it's so scalable. And I think that's what really attracted me to wanting to do what I do, is that, there's lots of charities and everybody's doing such great work, but I wanted to go, how do we scale this and make sure we have the most benefit for the most people? And so, we can help so many charities, and every dollar we receive, we can get $20 worth of goods out there, but we're helping thousands of charities. We're currently helping 4,000 charities, and charities are doing it so tough. So that's where I wanted to have the most benefit. I didn't want to have to choose. I wanted to help all charities, and I think that was really important to me. But, it's really important that we can do it at scale, and that we're really efficient in the way that we use funders' money, but we're also having that ripple effect to help lots of charities. And I think that was really important to me. But it's also, we're helping people and we're helping planet. And those are the two things that really resonated with me. And we're using technology to do that. And, on a daily basis, we help 3,000 Australians every day, but we're only around 30 people in Good360. So we're quite a small organisation for a charity, but we help around 3,000 people every day. And to me, that's, I think, one of the really big benefits of Good360, in the fact is there's not many of us, but we have big impact.
Now that's amazing. And I really appreciate you making that point, because one of the reasons we started this series was to really peer behind the curtain and see the amazing work that charities and NGOs are doing in Australia and globally. There's such a limited understanding of the work that this sector does. And it's often quite infantile, actually, in respect to saying, where does the money go? Rather than coming at it as actually, what's the impact they're having? Who are these amazing people that have started, that have run? No one's in this sector to make millions of dollars, right? Everyone is here, right?
Yeah. We'd stay in our normal jobs if we were.
That's right. We would have stayed working at a bank, right, or wherever. Everyone's here because they deeply care. And that's why, it's such an honour to have this time with you and many of our other impact leaders to effectively peer behind that curtain. Could I ask you just to dive a little further into that use of technology? Because I think it does highlight a powerful point around how effective fundraising and the dollars donated can be. If there's only 30 people in your team, yet you're impacting 3,000 people a day. Can you share a little more about how that works and how tech makes your work and the impact scalable?
Yeah, so we're an e-commerce company effectively. So you could say we're the eBay for charities. So businesses put up the goods that they have available, and then charities can shop 24/7 on our website. And I think that's the thing that's really important that a lot of people don't understand when they're trying to support a charity. It's their good intentions that they put onto charities without actually asking charities or communities what it is that they need. And so with Good360, we're all about the right people, the right goods to the right people at the right time. And disasters is probably one of the best places to understand this because, your heart goes out to people during disasters, whether that's in Australia or around the world. You just want to help. But often you never ask that community what they need. And all these goods or, time and effort goes out to these communities and nobody asks what they need. And so our system or our marketplace is set up for those communities to be able to go onto our marketplace and get the goods that they need in the quantities that they need it. And I think that's so important because that provides hope and dignity to the people in the community. So they can choose the clothing, the toys, the homewares that they need in the quantity that they need it. Whereas in disasters, you see it in the media all the time, people are sending stuff into those communities, and that's the next wave of disaster because they can't store it. They never asked for it. But people just are clearing out their houses and sending stuff into those communities that nobody ever asked. And so our technology is set up for businesses to give exactly what they have to give and communities to receive exactly what they need. And that is just a dignified approach to giving.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, what you've built is both scalable and efficient, and helps people based on their need at the time. You make a good point. I mean, I remember being in Lismore only a few days after the floods, and as you know, right, there was just an inundation of goodwill
Yep.
without people realizing, no, actually, it should go to organisations like Good360, like Thread Together, who actually know what they're doing on the ground.
Yep.
And are able to efficiently support those people in a dignified manner, which is also, from a psychosocial perspective, so important.
And it's timing because it's not always needed in the first 6 weeks. Like, we're
That's
still
right.
supporting communities many years later. So the product needs to be timed when that community needs it. And that's what we can do. We can stage the timing of when the community needs it. And Lismore's, still needs products sent to them. And it's the timing of when they need that. And the media, the spotlight's gone. Nobody's still looking at the bushfires. No one's looking at the drought and the floods. And that's what's so important, is keeping the spotlight on those communities.
You mentioned before the cost of living, which has obviously directly impacted Australians' ability to buy even and fulfil their basic needs for many families around the country. What are some of the key, perhaps, challenges and even opportunities that you're seeing in this time for the work you do and ability to be even more targeted and create more impact?
So we consider the cost of living crisis a silent crisis. So like Lismore or the bushfires, you could see it. The media spotlight was on it. You could see the fire, you could see the flood. There was images of that, but the cost of living crisis is silent. So there's no images of what that looks like. And so the outpouring of support and funding is not there. So the corporates are not opening up their wallets, the government's not funding it, and the individuals haven't got the $50 to give it because they are the people who actually need the $50. So the people who were providing $50 for disasters are the ones who now need that support, and they don't know how to ask for that support. And so what's happening is the charity sector has never been busier. So, for ourselves and like many in the sector, we're twice as busy as what we were during COVID. And we were flat out during COVID, but now we're doing twice as much work, but we're not receiving any of the funding from our normal supporters, whether that's government, corporate, or philanthropic, or the individual person who normally give us $20. And so that's causing, immense pressure on the sector. So the funding is not there, and the staff are exhausted because they've been working years in back-to-back disasters, and they just don't know how to keep helping the people who need it. So it's incredibly challenging, but the sector, the type of industry that just keeps having to step up and be innovative and provide solutions to Australians who need it most. So it is incredibly challenging for all of the sector, including ourselves.
And I'm glad we're having this conversation at this time for that very reason. There's a lot more support we'd like to be able to give you, and we're speaking to a number of businesses today. So we do want to accelerate as quickly as possible additional funding for you. If we could just touch back on your journey, if that's okay. Love to hear what are some of the unique. I mean, I think in this sector there's endless challenges, right? You just touched on some foundational ones. Perhaps at a more personal level, what are some of the key challenges and joys of your work on even a daily or weekly basis?
I mean, it's always challenging being in the sector, but the joy is that, it's the passion. The people that you work with are just so passionate about what they do. And that's why we're in this sector. Like, we wake up to serve Australians, but also provide solutions for our business. Like everybody in this sector is just incredibly passionate. Like we live for what we do, and we get so much joy out of what we do because that's why we come to work, and it's just incredible. And I was just thinking about, how do we all end up here? We sort of come from corporate careers, and we had the skills that we've built up in our corporate careers, and we talk about crossing over into the charitable sector because we can provide these skills for good now. And it is an incredible thing that, you just get to do good in the world, and you get to help people, whether it's the charities that you're serving or the businesses, providing them with solutions to be able to help their teams and their customers do good in the world. It's an incredible, joyful thing to do. Like, you hear about people who have jobs that they don't feel like they're working because they're doing good in the world. It really is quite a privilege to be able to have one of those jobs. So we feel so privileged to be able to do this type of work. So, whilst we say there's challenges, it's a great thing to be able to wake up and do this type of work in your job.
How would you reimagine this sector? I mean, it just strikes me as there's, I can relate to everything you're saying, right, around the joy of being of service. And I think I can speak on behalf of our small team. We're passionate about what we do. We're building something meaningful, impacting the lives of many people through our charity and NGO partners. And yet at the same time, the industry is seen from the broader public as kind of this cute, almost sector that is generally people don't, I think sadly, even take that seriously. And I think there's no ill intent there. It's just a lack of understanding about how broad this sector is, how it's manned by extraordinary, smart, dedicated, passionate people, such as yourself, and it's providing an extraordinary service to Australians, to our brothers and sisters in Asia Pacific, and to people around the world. From humanitarian disasters to providing support to local families and everything in between. I'm just curious, like, given the amount of time you spent in this sector, have you had any particular sort of thoughts around how we can reimagine the way in which most of us understand the work, which could therefore unlock, I think, far more funding and support over time? Just curious about if there's any sort of big picture thinking that you've done in this space and what you might like to share.
Yeah, I think it's the whole lack of respect for the intelligence that's actually in this sector. A lot of people think they'll come in for a day and they'll give you some skilled volunteering and they'll solve all your problems, and they don't understand that, you're living at 24/7, 365 days of the year, and that you actually, you do totally understand the sector, and the thing that's holding you back is resources and funding. It's not lack of knowledge or skills. And that there's incredibly skilled and dedicated people here, it just really is lack of funding to the sector, and that, this industry, this sector has been, if you look back from the droughts, 2018 to now, the sector has had to step up 24/7 to keep being the people who keep solving it, and on the front line day and night. And then, there's so many, people making ridiculous statements about, what the sector's doing, and you just go, but when you need the sector, they're there all hours of the day, night, weekend, etc. Um,
Mm,
it's quite a interesting space when you're outside of the sector to be able to look on in. So I think, there
mm.
just needs to be some untied funding, rather than the people who are outside the sector seem to think that they need to tie up the funding and tell people how to use that funding, as if the people who are running these businesses just don't know how to do that. I
There's
think,
almost like a
come
sort
to
of an
work for a day and have a little lesson of how these people actually run their businesses. You'd be quite amazed
yeah.
how much they do with how little.
There's almost an unintended arrogance, isn't there, around, okay, we'll volunteer for a day and tell you how things should be done,
Mm,
and we'll tick some boxes and then go back to our jobs, as if the private sector has all the answers.
mm,
And I know, as I say that, I highlight it's unintended, and I think it's a result of a power imbalance that is actually that in a way actually sort of erodes the impact that we're all wanting to see. And so I think there's a real requirement there to challenge, and there's some good thinking being done on this around how do we raise awareness around the way in which we're not sort of thinking clearly about the sector, and we're not ready to deeply challenge our own assumptions, and actually work backwards from the objectives that we're wanting to see. And as you say, I mean, when a disaster happens, we have these expectations, but it goes out of the media. I mean, you look at Libya, right? Like, there's nothing in Libya anymore, right? 2 weeks on, and this is going to take years for this community. It's one example, right, to recover. And we work with some big NGOs, some UN agencies, and it's a constant frustration for them, right? And they have to kind of raise as much funding during the initial media cycle, because they know, a week or two later, it'll be eclipsed by something else, right? Now, that's probably going to get worse as climate change changes the climate, induces further extreme weather events, and you can see a world in which we're just going to have this sort of rolling news cycle of potentially the next disaster. And our consumers are we going to just become increasingly, have compassion fatigue? And actually, as a result, we just don't know. And I imagine this is an issue for you guys, where it's like, there's so much that is being asked of consumers as far as that share of wallet. What are your thoughts about that as a potential sort of next stage and a result of the impending climate crisis?
Yeah, I think it's already here. You can see it's from, the days of the come back to the drought, and the bushfire. Australians were just so ready to support their communities. But as I said, now those people who were supporting those communities from those initial big disasters here in Australia are the ones who need supporting themselves. And that's why I call it the silent crisis for the cost of living crisis, because these are the Australians themselves who are now struggling, that whatever's happening in the media of disasters around the world or here in Australia, they're exhausted. They can't deal with that fatigue because they've got problems in their own household, in their own neighbours, with their family. They can't deal with helping anybody else because they're really just struggling to pay their own bills. And so that, 24-hour cycle of another disaster happening anywhere is something they can't comprehend. So they can't open their wallets because they're literally trying to pay their own bills. And so the charities or whoever's trying to support those communities are getting no support from the general consumer. But it doesn't just come down to the consumer. It's businesses. As I said, these businesses are doing it really tough because they haven't had sales as they predicted in the last 12 months. So they are also the people or the organisations who would fund communities. If you looked in the bushfires, etc., Australian businesses were incredibly generous. If you looked at Lismore, Australian businesses were putting a lot of money into those communities. So it wasn't just government who was stepping up, it was businesses, it was individuals. But these are the businesses who have had a really tough trading condition this year. So they can't support, and then their customers and teams can't support. It's not just businesses, it's the employees who also do workplace giving. So, around Australia, you've got all these pockets of organisations who normally fund, who are all struggling themselves. And that's why I said the exhaustion is there. You're right. The share of wallet is really struggling because business, individuals, and then let's talk about the government. Governments had asked from every industry coming out of COVID. So, the wallets of every type of organisation across the world, not just Australia. It's a tough time in the economy.
And I think the sector, there's an opportunity to overall do a better job at storytelling. Because as we know, we talk of 1,000 people switch off. You tell one individual story, people connect. And that's a function of the extent to which we always lived in small communities up until only the last few hundred years, and we would know the people directly who were impacted in our community. And sadly, a lot of that's been lost. And so that reminds us, it connects us to people. And of course, what happened in Lismore was an example of how tribal we are subconsciously. We respond to events that happen to those that we perceive as our own. Our circle of compassion is, and there's evolutionary reasons why this has been important, but it is limited to a certain radius. And so, we are running on ancient software as human beings, and that's not going to change. But how do we actually use that to galvanise our support for those in our community and those that we consider our own? Yeah, we could talk about this for days, because it can be a fascinating topic. But just if we come back to business, because ultimately we do want more businesses to support your work, and so. We build Equal Change so that it addresses a business's direct need, which is to bring to life their giving, which is to address their ESG, to help them communicate it, and to meet those growing stakeholder expectations, their customers, their staff, their suppliers, that business is actually contributing to building a better world. And so thankfully that is a force that is operating on businesses that is only becoming more compelling and more direct. But I am kind of saddened that we haven't raised significant funding for you yet. And I say sad because I do take it personally, even though it's not nothing. Like, we've raised $7,000, but there's no reason why we couldn't, increase that significantly in the next few months. So perhaps if you can just share what $7,000 does, just to bring to life a relatively small amount of money that most of us can kind of get our heads around. What impact does that have for Good360?
Yeah. So as I said before, $1 actually raises $140,000 worth of goods that we can distribute out there into the community. So that's very leveraged and that's very impactful. And we've got charities all around the country who need access to those goods. So, we can work in local and rural regional communities, and, we've got cause areas all around the country that need access to that, whether they're our First Nations, domestic violence charities. So, we've got single parents who are really struggling to be able to get the basic essential items. And, we're talking about healthcare type products being our personal care products, whether that's shampoo and conditioner, through to cleaning goods. They're just these sorts of basic essentials that are just really costly now when they're doing their groceries. And then I always talk about clothing as being one of those basic essentials that families are really struggling with, because their kids changed clothing size. But adults hopefully can just wear last season's clothing, but kids are changing clothing size. So $140,000 allows us to help families get clothing for their children. And then what we're finding is that some of the basic essential home appliances break. So whether that's the toaster, the kettle, all those basic essentials mean that we can replace those for families as well. So $7,000 turned into $140,000 worth of essentials is really helping families, and especially our single families, single parent families around the country as well. So I think that makes a huge difference. So whilst you're saying $7,000 isn't a lot, we're saying that's really helping families around the country.
So for businesses on this webinar today, and Alison will be posting this, it'll become a permanent page under our Impact Leaders section in our site. Supporting Good360 is an amazing way to double down many times over on that dollar that is given for your business. So if you're working for a business, if you own a business, iCoreChange makes it simple and powerful and delivers actually a return from a marketing perspective. And there's many touch points along that customer journey, which we help you bring to life. You're giving to support incredible organizations like Good360, so that not only does it address your sustainability, especially supporting Good360 as an organization, but it engages your customers in a way that drives engagement, drives conversions, and drives loyalty. Alison, is there any other ways in which iCoreChange businesses could help?
Yes, so obviously the donation of cash is just so vital to us. But, if they've also got spare or excess goods that they haven't been able to sell through, we'd love a conversation about how we can facilitate that into their community. They can donate that directly to Good360. But as you spoke about before, that local connection, if they've got stores, we can connect that locally into their community for them as well. We do what we call a local store match. And I think that has been what we've found for businesses to be something that really connects them into their local community as well. And I think that, as you said, that local village, people love that, keeping product in their local community as well.
And what's the best way to connect with Good360?
Directly onto our website, so good360.org.au.
.org.au. You heard it loud and clear from the founder herself. Alison, what do you most look forward to every day?
I think it's just knowing the amount of support that we're making here in Australia. It's that ripple effect of solving for business, that they didn't have a solution here in Australia. I think that's just so important, thinking that these goods are not going to go to waste, but also the fact that charities and disadvantaged schools get access to these beautiful products, and that 3,000 Australians, are literally being supported every day. That's 2 every minute. So in the time that we've had the, fabulous opportunity to talk, we've helped a lot of people. And I think that just gives me great joy, knowing that, I transitioned from a corporate career that, could be a bit soulless, to something like this is just brings me a lot of joy. And I feel that, I have, 2 wonderful boys, and I just think that they get to see their mum do something that brings joy in her world, and hopefully, that's a great example to them.
And if I can just ask you a final question, which I like to end with, when many years from now, when you look back on your professional life, what do you believe you'll be most proud of?
I think, for me, it will be that businesses, this is our goal, is, we want to get $1 billion worth of goods donated to Australians. And for me, I just want to be that it is just the way businesses do business. And so that they don't waste any goods, and that all goods are donated, and that employees and customers will look back and not know any different. And that they'll just not know or could even imagine that businesses once did put it in landfill. And if we can change that here in Australia, I just would be so proud of that that it just becomes one of those things that people used to think, oh, that used to happen, and I can't imagine how generations ago, and that's just something that never happens in our lifetime anymore. And that would make me really proud if we can just change that habit here in Australia, because it just blows my mind that you could possibly think it's okay to landfill something that somebody else could use. And so that's the thing that I would be most proud of, if we could just change that habit, because it just seems like a pretty silly habit at the moment. So I just want to, yeah, it's just mind blowing that we could have that happening in a country like ours when there is so much need. We know 1 in 8 Australians are living below the line of poverty, which again blows my mind here in Australia. So let's just change that. And I'd be really proud if we can make that a new habit that just seems much more sensible.
I think we'll look back on this period in history, and our grandchildren might say, "What were you thinking?"
No, it's like, how wasteful were you?
Yeah, and if we're still around, we'll say, "Well, actually, we weren't. We weren't." And I think we are going to have to reimagine, because we're coming up against the limits of what the Earth is able to sustain. Those natural limits. So much is going to have to change. I think we'll look back on exactly this. How did businesses over-manufacture and to throw things out? How did we slaughter millions of animals every day? How did we throw away the amount of clothing that we do? Based on what and for what? And to serve what we need. Unfettered capitalism has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. It's also created a lot of unintended consequences, and we've normalized systems that are actually destroying the land and the earth that supports us, and actually not making people ultimately much happier. That's another conversation. It's been great to touch on a lot of these really important points with you. We've got one question that's come in from one of our listeners. How does Good360 plan to expand its reach and impact in the coming years?
So as I said, our goal is $1 billion worth of goods to people in need. So it is all about amplifying our message, so getting more people to know who Good360 is. So we have a campaign in October called Everyone Day, where we're asking businesses to jump on board and help fundraise for Good360. So that's all about reach. So every October we'll run this campaign and get businesses to tell their customers about Good360. And so, the more retailers that sign up about this, it is also the education, so that businesses donate the goods, but then customers also expect that of their businesses to do that. So then they shop with businesses who have that same mentality of what I spoke about. And then customers only shop with businesses who do good in the world. And so we're trying to bring that mentality into Australia. Every October, customers can, shop with their wallets to say, we support those businesses that are doing good. So please look out for the Everyone Day campaign and be part of that movement of, getting businesses to be responsible with their goods and expecting that of businesses, and hopefully work at businesses that also have that thought process as well.
It's a movement that's upon us, isn't it? Consumers expecting all businesses to give back, to be part of the solution. And it would seem we're heading towards a tipping point where this will become the new normal. Yeah. So our visions are aligned completely. Alison, thank you so much, founder and managing director of Good360. Thank you so much for joining us on the Impact Leaders webinar.
Thank you so much for your time and your great questions. Thank you.